Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be joining us from right now across the world. Delighted to welcome you to today's MIT Sloan Executive Education LinkedIn Live event, Handling Transitions During Times of Disruptive Change. We've certainly heard a lot about transitions recently in the press, especially here in the United States. And we've heard a lot about disruption as well over the past several months, and in fact, well before that. With the COVID pandemic affecting how we all live, work, and function, it's certainly been a time of disruption for many of us. I know personally, here at MIT Sloan, we went through a very fast transformation for a lot of our programs that we typically would run on the campus to what we call live online, and with a lot of help from a very flexible and supportive team and a great group of participants that continue to join us for our programs, we've had great success in doing that. Our hope today is to share some insight from two of our faculty on how you manage difficult transitions during times of disruption and change. It's a very timely topic, as I've mentioned, and in fact, we're going to be launching a new program in just a few weeks. On December 7th and 8th, we'll be launching a new program with the two faculty that are joining us today on navigating transitions during disruptive change. We'll also have another more extensive program available on a similar topic for dealing with disruptive change in March of 2021. With that, let me introduce our faculty that will be guiding us through today's LinkedIn Live event and will be leading our upcoming programs as well. Delighted to introduce you to Hal Gregersen and Roger Lehman, both senior lecturers here at MIT Sloan, where they lead a number of executive education programs that deal with a variety of topics, from innovation, the power of questions and leadership, and as I mentioned, the two upcoming programs on navigating transitions, both in disruptive change and digitally disruptive transitions. The program today will be recorded, so we'll be sending you a link to the recording if you'd like to review it later as well, or share it with colleagues. But thank you again for joining us. And without any further delay, over to you, Al Roger.
Thank you, Rob. And Roger and I are delighted to be with you, to work with you today. In fact, I think the appropriate word is honored. As I was scanning through the greetings from all over the world, it's amazing that we're here together in 2020, which is arguably the year of change. This is a year unprecedented in our lives. Change is happening all around us. It's global, obviously the pandemic, and the impacts are everywhere at work and in life. And you might be wondering why Roger and I chose leading transitions versus leading change. Roger, why did we do that? Why isn't it leading change versus leading transitions?
I think, Hal, because the change is an event. It's when something happens, and change happens and can happen in milliseconds. Like a car accident in terms of a dramatic change, or all of a sudden a promotion that you weren't expecting. The transition is how we as humans navigate that journey of change, integrate it, make sense of it, and the impact that it has on our life. And the more disruptive the change is, often the more extensive and long the transition is in terms of understanding it and adapting to it so that we continue to grow and develop in our life.
Given that, Roger, what's one of the toughest transitions you've been facing in 2020?
Yeah, I think there was, when I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, there was actually a personal one and a professional one, and I realized they're both very closely intertwined. Tessa, my wife's father, is 97 years old, lives alone in England, and it's been very difficult not to be able to visit him. We are in daily contact with him multiple times a day. And of course, Zoom really, or FaceTime really, at least helps us bridge that, but it's not the same as being able to be there. So at a personal level, there is this real struggle with not being able to have that kind of being able to go and visit, being able to be there in a moment, the restriction on our travel, on our freedom of movement. And then I was thinking professionally, in many ways it's the same. I love teaching because I love being with people and engaging with people in a personal classroom setting. And to go to Zoom where I'm looking at a video image, and it's been much tougher to really connect emotionally. I've found ways to do it, but it's required a lot of effort and adjustment. And that's that transition. The change with COVID happened pretty quickly. Coming to terms with it and integrating it and trying to minimize its negative impact and even to find some of the positive impacts is the journey, and that's the transition. But what about for you, Hal?
Wow.
What's your transition?
You know, early on in my life, I was a photographer and I thought I had the technology nailed. But when 2020 happened professionally, moving to this whole Zoom techno land and setting up studios at home, it's been utterly daunting. And it still is. It's not done. I mean, if I were to scan the camera around, you'd laugh at what's beyond the screen. It's like still trying to figure this out. So that's, in one sense, a technical challenge at work. At home, we've had some real difficult things. We're a blended family. My wife had 4 children. I had 3. We have 7 kids, 11 grandchildren. My wife and I have chosen to not travel at all this year. Good things have happened in our lives and really sad things. We had a grandchild who was born and lived for about a month and passed away. And the only way we knew him was through this camera lens. We were never there physically. And so we're all in the middle of some major transitions, some seemingly small, some obviously large. And I think Roger and I would really love to, just for a moment in the chat box, hear from you. Could you please share with us? And I know there's so many people, it's going to go really fast, but we're going to look as quickly as we can. In the chat box, please share what's one of your toughest transitions this year. Could be professional, could be personal. Please. I'm going to look down now at that chat. Again, some of your biggest challenges, toughest transitions. We'd love to see your input. It's a good thing. Kush, thanks for your comfort. I appreciate your kind comments. We'd love to hear your stories. Wow. This is just ranging from dealing with incompetent leaders to teaching our children to wrestling with cancer to elder care to our own wrestle with mortality. These are just, they've got the whole range here. Any thoughts on this, Roger, as you look at it?
I think,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I think that's the nature of really disruptive change is that it impacts us in multiple, in fact, I would say almost in every aspect of our life. There's very few parts of our life that remain unimpacted by significant disruptive change. And we certainly, I would agree with you, 2020 has been a year of just change like I've never experienced in my life, because it's all encompassing. There's not an aspect of my life not hit by this.
Well, and I noticed a comment, is 2020 really any different change-wise than any earlier time in our lives? And we could debate that today, and I'm not going to get into debate, but at least for me in 2020, what's unique about this is a global pandemic having global implications, and certainly change has been happening, but I just don't recall in my lifetime this sort of a change where all of us are in this same big boat, wrestling with challenges at work. And given the virtual nature of our work now, it's work and non-work blending together in ways that for many of us, we could keep separate. But now with somebody working in the bedroom next door that wasn't there before, it's creating deep complications. And so, our roles are shifting. The roles we have at work, the roles we have at home.
And when you say that, Hal, what comes to my mind is that as humans, we actually are really adaptable to change. Humans can change, and we often like change, and even change we don't like, we adapt. What we don't deal well with is uncertainty. And I think why 2020 is different is that we have global uncertainty. When we started with COVID back in March, I live in Europe, the idea was this will be over in a couple of months. And we've learned to understand that actually we don't know how long. And even with a vaccine, the virus may mutate. So the uncertainty is overwhelming for us. And that's a global uncertainty.
When you say that, Roger, it reminds me of the first time I met you, which I had been teaching at the London Business School and then made a transition to INSEAD, moved from London with my wife to Paris in France. We actually lived in a little village outside of Paris, about 45 miles south of Paris. And all I remember from that first transition was we were in a new country. It was a new language. I'd taken French in 9th grade, but couldn't remember any of it. It was a new culture. It was new food, which was very good. New transportation systems, new healthcare systems, all kinds of things outside of work. How do you deal with people fixing your house? How do you get the utilities set up? This is just a whole different world. At work, I was transitioning from teaching MBAs to full-time teaching executive education. And in between, I was trying to interact in this French language and culturally in ways that was just completely problematic. And I'll be honest with you, when I made that move to France with my wife, it was exhausting, it was difficult. And within 6 to 9 months, I was moderately to severely depressed, sometimes waking up in the morning, not even wanting to get out of bed and just struggling with it all. I'm grateful for people like Roger and others there who were a support system around me and helped my wife and me make it through that very serious cross-cultural transition to roles at work, to interacting with people socially, and to just all the non-work stuff that was new and different. It was rich with uncertainty, Roger, as you're saying. And I can't help but think of 2020 as we've all globally moved into the new country, the foreign country of coronavirus. It has rich, deep implications. It has, in so many different ways, altered in positive ways and negative ways these roles that we're playing. And what we know from adjusting when we move from country to country or new community to community is that we start out with the honeymoon effect with what's interesting, exciting, and new. We then meet reality, and when reality meets us, we hit this bottom out part of the curve of culture shock, where we're wondering, who am I? Do I belong here? Do I just go home? If I stay, how am I going to figure out what's really right and wrong to be doing here? It's a very deep, difficult, uncomfortable moment. And if we choose to stay in those transitions, we end up then adjusting with the roles to, who might I become that's different? How can I learn to fit into this place? And at the end of the day, we come out of that deep curve into some mastery level where it's actually exciting to be in this new culture. That might be moving from city to city, it might be moving from country to country, but it seems that role adjustment from going across cultures is really one powerful framework, one of three, to help us think about the transition we're in the middle of. It's not just work, it's also non-work, and it's social interaction. Zoom is different than face-to-face. With face masks is different than without.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and with that, that what comes to my mind is that, as you mentioned, there's the role that we take on, but it's paired to the task as well. And the whole reaction, my own response to COVID back in the spring, when we had our first lockdown of about a month, was actually fairly pleasant. I could focus on other things. It was disruptive, but it wasn't as difficult as when we've ended up with having the second one just starting a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so my role in teaching, my role in my daily life had to adjust. And the way I did things had to adjust. I couldn't do things the way I have done them previously.
Well,
and I think that task adjustment. Yeah.
Well, there's so roles, like what I do at work as a professor is a role, and there are all kinds of tasks related to that.
Yeah.
And in life with COVID, a simple task might be washing our hands.
Yeah.
And pre-COVID in March, I thought I did a very good job of washing my hands, but our daughter, who's a nurse in an emergency room here nearby in Boston, she came over and taught my wife and me, here's how you wash your hands, Mom and Dad. You got to put the soap on, get in between the fingers, go around your thumbs, get your fingernails, get the wrist because it's up there. And, I felt like a 4-year-old again, learning how to wash my hands. And that's the bottom part of that curve when we're going up a learning curve. We all know those about specific tasks. Like, what do I do? Our daughter taught us, can I do it? Do I have hot water? Do I have the right soap? Yes, I can do that. But then will I do it sort of at the top of the curve and do it consistently?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, it's mixed. Some days I do, some days I don't.
Yeah.
And so we've got the second thing to pay attention to in these transitions is, number one, the roles, work, non-work, social, that are adjusting through that curve. Then at the bottom of that curve is a whole bunch of learning curves around all kinds of tasks that we're learning, from washing our hands to making Zoom cameras work.
Yeah, and what comes to my mind is that part of the struggle with the task is we're often ambivalent about it.
What do you mean by that?
So that clearly the same issue, where we didn't have the advantage of having a daughter who was a nurse in an ER, but we were told by the media. I can remember even Sanjay Gupta on CNN telling me how to wash my hands. And yet there were times where I just thought, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do it that way. I think he told me I had to sing Happy Birthday twice, and that would be enough time. And then there were times where I thought, no, I'm not going to do this Happy Birthday stuff. And so the ambivalence about change, and not wanting to necessarily adapt to it, being resistant.
Well, the resistant part, We're now what? March, depending on where you start the timing point, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 9, 10 months into this process.
Yeah.
Here's what the research would say about navigating cross-cultural transitions. It's about the 6 to 9 month period when 25% of the people who move to a different country, they're like, I'm fed up with this. I don't fit in here. I am tired of it.
Yeah.
I'm not like them. They're not like me. I have no interest. I'm going home.
Yeah.
And honestly, 20% or so quit and they go home.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think, as I look at the news around the world right now with COVID spiking and going on the rise, we're at the bottom of this cross-cultural transition into the new land of coronavirus.
Yeah.
And everybody just wants to go home, myself included. I'll be very honest. I mean, there are moments when I just want to go home.
Yeah.
And this is the moment of truth. It's like, okay, number one, we can't really go home. Number two, even if we did, it's not what it used to be. And surprise, if I'd lived for 9 months in Australia and then went back home to Boston, Boston's changed. I've changed.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is we're wrestling with the going back home question in a situation where it's very complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned it, and I just would underscore it. Even if we could go back home, home isn't going to be the same as the place that we left.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there are permanent changes in our daily routine in our life that are going to be with us weeks, months, years, and on some of them, I'm sure, permanently. Which makes it tough for us to accept at times. For me to accept.
Yeah. And I think there is that toughness in accepting. There's that difficulty, the challenge in that. I'm with you, Roger. And I was scanning some of the comments, and I think both Roger and I would agree with you that in some sense we're painting a pretty negative portrait here, a pretty negative picture. And if it's coming across that way, it's unintentional. Because there is, as many of you are mentioning, there's this downside energy-taking element to navigating these transitions. But there's an upside, if we choose to, where it's energy-giving.
Yes.
And I think most of us, for the most part, are pretty thrilled about commuting less, which opens up all kinds of other opportunities for a lot of us in different situations. It also is a moment of transition where we are doing things differently. Here at MIT, we did not have that much online executive education teaching going before COVID came. And like other universities around the world, we have catapulted into the future 20 years that otherwise would have taken 20 years. And that's an opportunity that now we're realizing, wow, why didn't we do this before? So in your comments, you're spot on right.
Yeah.
This disruptive change that we're in the middle of, and it's not just COVID, it's social issues. There are a lot of things going on right now. These things they held the potential for energy giving and energy taking moments, opportunity and difficult challenges. One of the leaders that Roger and I have interviewed, Roger knew before from some teaching that he's done before, and we had the chance to interview Nikki Sparshot, who on February 26th of 2020 became the CEO of Unilever in Australia and New Zealand and the CEO globally of T2, the tea company. So she's put into this role, doesn't know people, and has to figure out, how do I move forward virtually now, because COVID hits as soon as she's put in the role. And Nikki's instinct is action. She is a very productive, high-performing kind of leader. And she said, I had to realize, she told us, that I needed to connect with my people first and ask them questions like, who are you? And why do you show up at work? And why have you chosen Unilever? And what matters most to you? And what's your purpose in life? She was asking those questions on the initial Zoom calls and not the typical, well, what should we do? Why should we do it? How can we do it? Let's get moving.
Yeah.
Nikki literally took on Zoom calls, she would start intentionally with those questions. Who are you? And those things I just mentioned. She'd be looking at the corners of the screen. What's going on in their life? Their pets, their kids, their background, their home, their context. And Nikki told us that, much to my surprise, I was able to develop more intimate, and she used that word intentionally, not in a sexualized sense, but in an emotional intimacy sense. She said,
connection.
I really connected with my people in ways that was stunning. And once she made those connections, then started moving together around the what do we do? Why do we do it? Why might we try this? How? And so on.
Right. Yeah. And how, that I think that's really important to point out, this issue about the emotions, because my sense is that it's so important that we tune into what we are experiencing. And you're absolutely right, and the comments are right, that there is this issue of adjusting, of feeling like my life has been disrupted. And I recently did a seminar for a global organization with their top leaders. And when I asked them what's on their mind, overwhelmingly it was lack of freedom, lack of options, uncertainty, unable to connect with friends and family. And I do think that there is this initial negative. Why is this happening? And I don't like it. And part of our task, I think, is to move through that curve as well, because there is kind of a transition curve of emotions. And why we think emotions are so important for us to talk about with all of you on this call is because you have to, first of all, connect to and understand what you're feeling before you're going to be able to help those around you, family members, friends, direct reports, whatever. If you can't understand and accept what you're feeling, you're not going to be able to connect to the other people, the other person, whether it's your spouse or your children or your parents or your boss or whatever. And one of the striking examples that has recently come out was a senior executive was telling me that they had been asked to meet with another member of the global organization from a different division, and they agreed to meet with the person. And one of the first questions they asked this person was, have you talked about this with your boss? What, you want to talk with me, but why aren't you talking about it with your boss? And the individual said, I did talk about it with my boss, and I asked for a special one-on-one meeting with my boss. And what I said was, basically shared with the boss how I was feeling. I was feeling disrupted, struggling. This has gone on now for 9 months. I feel like I'm not effective at work. I'm not being efficient. I'm distracted. And as she shared these things with the boss was kind of looking at her and nodding their head. And at the conclusion, the boss looked and said, okay, good, got that off your chest. Now let's get to work. And I thought it was a wonderful example of how my understanding of it would be how difficult it was for the boss to accept these emotions from this individual, because most likely they were not willing to accept them in themselves. And it became a major disconnect.
Yep.
And one of our tasks is to be aware of what we're feeling, to accept it, understand it, and help others. And it is as we navigate this curve, we do go from a sense of denial. Emotionally, when COVID hit, most people said, I can remember I had a program I was supposed to deliver in Singapore in February. And at that point, we decided to postpone the program. And the decision was to postpone it long enough that we would be sure we would be able to have the on-campus program. So we postponed it until the end of April. And I use that only as an example because that's a sense of kind of denial. We'll get over this in a couple of months and we'll go back to the way the world was.
Mm-hmm.
And as we go through this process of denial, we then come to terms with our frustration. And that may be what people are picking up because, quite frankly, I still am frustrated with having to adapt my life to COVID instead of COVID adapting to my life. And then can be a feeling of helplessness. And if I go back to Nikki's case, she says, I didn't feel depressed, but there were times I thought, what am I doing? How am I going to do this? How am I going to lead this team when I can't sit down with them, when we're doing everything virtually? And there were times where she felt overwhelmed. And then if we continue this and we acknowledge it, we do transfer out of and grow into a state where we begin to find meaning, new ways of doing things, innovative ways of doing things that are more exciting and challenging, like you were talking about, Hal, in terms of our own learning curve and teaching. We often then start reaching out to others for support, for understanding, and helping us navigate it. And we move to a position of accepting, integrating these changes in our life and moving up to a new level of understanding and adapting. And I think this is the emotional curve that is so important for us when we're navigating disruptive change.
Roger, thanks for sharing that. I've been listening and glancing and looking at some of the comments and notions of we're really living in a moment of truth are coming through. These are defining moments for us. We can approach it individually, I see, or in solidarity, collectively. And there's just more than the person than this body that shows up. There's a soul to who we are, and emotions are part of that. So this transition is really forcing us not only to pay attention to the role transitions we're in the middle of and the tasks we're learning, but also throughout that entire process, we have to manage ours and with others, the emotion. What's energy giving right now? What's energy taking? And when we're dealing with uncertainty, which we all know that, the energy taking emotions can hijack us. We know that.
Yeah.
We know it personally, we know it from the research. And if we simply say emotions don't matter, we're blindsiding ourselves to a part of our organization, our team, and ourselves that's crucial to building solidarity.
Yeah.
So when we sit down in those moments where we have honest conversations and we talk perhaps about how has your role changed, what are the conflicts, do you have enough autonomy to fix it, are you working on overload, how can we deal with that, to specific tasks, and do you have the right Zoom equipment, fill in the blank. We can do all those things and make some progress. But if you look at the world's most innovative companies before COVID came, they were doing then what they do now in order to barrel through COVID more productively, which is, in Amy Edmondson's psychological safety logic, they already were creating a safe enough space for people to talk about the tough things. I'm wrong, I'm uncomfortable, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm concerned, fill in the blank. And so what we have to do is create that space with colleagues, friends, and even family to be able to ask 3 questions like, where are you right now?
Yeah.
Are you living in the past? Are you living in the future? Are you here with me? And when we get here in the present, here and now, focused on what's going on, then it's like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
And if people are willing to share with us, then do you want to talk about it? Would you like to talk about it?
Yeah.
And those three questions, where are you? Are you here with us? How are you feeling? And would you like to talk about it? They are significant indicators of how much psychological safety we have to navigate all these dimensions of the transition.
Yeah, and how it's fascinating when you bring that up, because what comes to my mind is, and it goes back to change and transition. A crucial fact of change and those transitions is that all change at some level, even if it's just minor, involves a degree of loss, of disruption.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that we have found collectively, you and I working together with our programs at MIT and with our companies that we're consulting to, is often people don't appreciate and respect the disruption and the loss. And we did a seminar back for MIT back in, I think, March, where we focused on that with all change, there is loss, and there's a certain degree of mourning. And it can be just, I don't have the freedom I had, or I can't go to my favorite restaurant, or if I do, I feel I'm putting myself or my family at risk. Once we acknowledge these losses, it then becomes possible to move on. There's a lot of research in grief that says trying to avoid grieving is a very sure way to prolong the process of mourning, because we don't allow ourselves to acknowledge the loss and to move on. And that company I mentioned that I was working with a couple of weeks ago, one of the significant things that they had not thought about that was meaningful was to connect with their direct reports in terms of understanding what each of their direct reports had experienced in terms of loss. And not minimize or downplay that loss, because the loss is a very individual emotion. And what might seem trivial to another person can be extremely meaningful and powerful to me.
Yeah. Did Nikki Sparshot, that we talked about earlier in New Zealand, in Australia, did she call herself, I think, the Chief Emotion Officer? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
She's the CEO, and she doesn't use that word Chief Emotion Officer. She's not using it in the gimmicky, playful, sort of kooky kind of way.
Right.
It's meaningful because she's put the work in to make it meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think what Roger's saying here, if I'm reading it and looking through some of the comments again, there's this phrase Roger shared with me once, don't just stand there, do something. And what we're talking about is, no, actually, don't just do something, stand there for just a minute.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the emotion. Do the things perhaps we're talking about, and got a lot of great ideas here. And as we do that, we become deeper we have a deeper connection.
Yeah.
And so,
and how,
really,
I just want to say, I just remember in our interview with Nikki and in some of the follow-up conversations with her, her first priority was to say, how are you doing? What's working? What's not working? And she, not only to create the space for them to potentially share with her their struggles, but she specifically said, what's not working, or what are you concerned about? What's your primary concern? Because she said, I intuitively knew that if they couldn't talk about that, it was going to block them being able to engage with me. And she would share with them her own feeling as well, in terms of role modeling.
Well, in terms of role modeling, there's something I'd like to build on that, Roger, which is, given her experience, come back perhaps to ours for a second and leave folks with an idea that might be helpful.
Yes.
So a bit of summary before a final exercise with you, which is, again, as we move through these transitions and try to navigate and lead through them at work and in life, just take a moment to think of these three frameworks. Number one, what roles am I adjusting to? Number two, what are the new tasks that I'm learning? Number three, the emotional constellation of energy giving and taking through that whole process. Am I being aware of that, attending to it within myself, and creating a space for that to happen with others? Paying attention to those three things is not the answer, but it's certainly going to help us move things forward as we navigate transitions.
Yeah.
Now, what we also learned was that there's power in leveraging questions in unique ways at every stage of a transition. When we're operating on the edge of uncertainty, which we all are, questions are the answer, because there are no answers. We're creating them. And so when we're stuck, it could be stuck about a role-related issue. I don't have enough autonomy to change things, to fix stuff here. It could be stuck on a task issue of, I don't have the resources to do what you're asking me to do. It could be stuck on an emotional issue that could be work or non-work related. When we're stuck, here's my suggestion, our suggestion. Grab some paper or your computer, grab a pen. You could even do it right now. We're going to take a minute, in fact, to do it right now.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Grab a paper, grab a pencil, grab your computer. When you're stuck, the reason we're stuck is we're asking the wrong questions. That's the reason. And if we can simply ask a better question, we can get unstuck. Here's a methodology in 60 seconds to move it forward, 85% of the time. Write nothing but questions down about your challenge, your stuckedness. No explanations in your head about the questions you're asking. No answers after the questions you're asking. Just ask questions nonstop. Nothing but questions. If you do that, in a minute, you'll get about 5 questions per minute. It takes discipline to do this. But if you break the rules of engagement with your own head and say, I'm just going to ask questions now for 60 seconds, you will start asking different questions. Now, earlier, again, in this COVID world, one of our cats died, unfortunately, in a surgery, and I was feeling really badly about it. My wife was. I was stuck I was just stuck emotionally, and I was not making any progress on my work. Roger said, Hal, there's this questioning process. You call it a question burst. Ask nothing but questions. Why don't you do that? And so, honestly, I hadn't. I grabbed some paper. I'm just going to share with you real quick the questions that Roger shared and I created. Why is my heart aching? Why does it feel so empty? Where do I go with my emotions? Why does this drain so much energy out? How else might I look at it? What questions might Posey, our cat, be asking me? What do I miss about her? Do I have a whole picture of her in my head and heart? What role can gratitude play here and now? How can I remember her? How can I hold on to the good and bad? What lessons did I learn from her? What lessons is she teaching me now? How can I grow from this? How might God help heal my heart? How can I help my wife in her journey? And how can I respect her journey and not be distant? And how do I share my journey? And I got to the end of those questions. That took 4 minutes. It was 20 questions. Energy level different. I was lighter. I was open to a different way of approaching things, and it made all the difference for me. So we're going to literally take 1 minute now.
Yep.
Choose a challenge. Grab something to write down all the questions. I'm going to put my timer on right now for 60 seconds. And we'd love you to try to get at least 5 questions in 1 minute about your challenge that you're wrestling with. Go. There we go.
Yep.
We're a bit limited here towards the end, but just wanted to ask you, put in the chat box, did you reframe your challenge a little? Do you feel a little bit better about it? Have you maybe found a new idea? Did just asking questions help? Just put a couple of notes in. Did it make a difference? We'd love to see. I see your question, Gaurav. What we'd like to share is, it may sound simplistic and even simple and simplistic, but literally, this question burst process of just asking questions can help us make progress, even if it be small, to move things forward. Roger, do you have any final thoughts before we finish up here? And then I'll have a couple of final thoughts, and then we'll transfer to Rob.
I think it would be just the importance of tuning into yourself first before you can, that yourself, we have a phrase that we like to use, you are the instrument. And so it's about tuning into yourself in order to be more effective in your own life, but also in helping others. And how about you, Hal?
Well, I was just glancing, I was listening again, multitasking and glancing through. As I glanced through the comments, I was really struck with the goodness of that quick questioning exercise and people tapping into some fundamental issues. I think what I'd like to share with you from us, Roger and me and the team, is we are all in this together. And the more we reach out and ask someone for help when we need it, and trust me, we all need help right now, we can collectively make our way through these transitions in ways that will not only be efficient in one sense, but they will be inclusive and enable us to feel joy in the midst of deep sorrow. Yeah. They'll enable us to be able to move forward. And I am absolutely convinced that at the end of this tunnel, this road, this path that we're on, if we can collectively do some of the things we're talking about, we will come out in a different place and look back different people. We'll look back and see that we've become different for it. And for that, I'm grateful. We are. And we wish you truly the very best as you go forward with leading your own transitions. Thank you.
Hal, Roger, thank you so much for guiding us through the past 45 or 50 minutes and really sharing your insights and thoughts into how we as humans, as individuals, as leaders can really be mindful about how we can navigate transitions during difficult times, not just with COVID, but beyond that as well. I'd also like to thank all the participants that joined us today. We've been so impressed by not only the volume of feedback and comments that we're seeing, but also the quality. You're all really sharing some great personal stories and input and insight yourselves, and I think that's really helped to make this time valuable for everyone as well. We do have just a limited amount of time. I've been watching the screen, the comments, to try and capture some of the questions that have been submitted, and I think we have time for just a few. Okay. One question that came up earlier was, how does the nature of the transformation affect the curve that you've mentioned? So COVID, for instance, a very rapid transformation needing response within weeks and months, a very quick forced transformation. Other transformations may take time, may take more time and evolve over the course of years. That might be more of an industry disruption. How does that affect the curve, and how do people respond to that change?
I'm not sure if you're frozen, Roger. I'll respond, I guess. It's really a couple of ways of thinking about change is breadth and depth. Breadth meaning how many different things are changing, and depth meaning how deep are the implications for not only my roles, but my identity, who I am. And as any kind of change happens that demands a wide breadth, large number of things different, and some depth about our identity and who we are, there's going to be a longer transition, that longer and deeper when that breadth is wide and the depth is deep.
Thank you, Hal. And lastly, as we bring the program to a close, what resources are available to help people manage these transitions beyond what we've covered today? Are there things that you can point to that might help people going forward with this?
Roger, go first. I've got one thing. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think you're technically stuck, Roger. So I'm gonna respond. So here we go on resources. I finished this book, Life is in the Transitions, Bruce Feiler. It's a great book, basically studied a couple hundred people. Here's the net on it. Every 5 years, as human beings, we have major life transitions, and every life transition takes about 5 years. So life is in the transitions. And so it's a great set of ideas and stories there. I love Parker Palmer's writings and work. William Bridges has a great book about transitions. There are just a lot of good resources out there.
Can you hear me?
I'm afraid Roger's connection is bogged down.
It's bad, Roger. Sorry. You're off.
Hal, Roger, thank you again. And just a reminder for all of you that would like to spend more time with Hal and Roger going deeper into this topic, we are offering a program. It will debut for the first time live online on December 7th and 8th. It will also run again in 2021. If you're interested in learning more about this program, I encourage you to visit our website at executive.mit.edu. Hal teaches in a number of programs, some with Roger, some without. Please feel free to look at them and give them some consideration. You'll find program reviews that will hopefully help you make the right decision in picking a program. We look forward to welcoming you back to the MIT campus at some point. Until then, we have a full schedule of programs that we'll be offering live online. And lastly, my thanks to Courtney Burt and the team behind the scenes that helped make this presentation and program possible today. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you again online soon.
Thank you. Journey